Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Here's another legislative breakfast that the Farm Bureau and the Grange put on. Jim does a really good job setting these up, coordinating everything. The way we'll do this is whoever asks a question, if you please stand up, state your name, and then you can say your question. You'll have 2 minutes for your question, and then the senators or representatives will have 3 minutes to answer that. And we do this so that everybody gets a chance, an opportunity to speak. So today, the way we'll start this off is our representatives will let them stand up, introduce themselves, say what town they're from, and then we'll go from there with the questioning. And there's 2 mics situated out around here.
Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I'm one of your 2 state senators. I live in New Haven, and I serve in the Senate. You serve on 2 committees. In the morning, I serve as chair of Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and in the afternoons, I serve on government operations. Also wanted to let you know, Claire, your other senator, Senator Claire Eyre, sends her regrets. She's taking care of her grandson who has a ruptured eardrum, so they're off to the hospital, I think.
Amy Sheldon, I am from Middlebury, and I serve on the House Fish, Wildlife, and Water Committee.
Well, you were supposed to take a lot longer than I'm trying to locate Willem. I know he intended to be here, and he represents this district. I'm Dave Sharp. I represent Bristol, Lincoln, Starksboro, and Moncton. I'm the new chair of the Education Committee, and I wake up every day trying to think how we can do a better job educating the children of this state.
I guess that's it. Who'd like to start the things going with the first question? We have someone here.
Thank you, Charlie. Tim Buskey from Addison. A comment and a question. The comment is that I'm sounding the alarm again for Addison County. We have the highest number of Medicaid recipients, highest number of poor and working poor in the state of Vermont, and nothing's being done in the area of Medicaid reimbursement. So we're losing doctors. You hear the news every day about Porter Hospital, and we're losing medical services to the folks that need it the most in our county. My second part is a question. The headline in the Free Press this morning across the front page indicated that we're looking again at the healthcare exchange. So what are we looking at?
No one's here from healthcare. I would just say that, as you all know, the healthcare exchange has been a terrible, difficult problem. It's been extraordinarily frustrating for the legislature because, we don't have direct control over that type of thing. This is a work of the executive branch of government to get the job done. And we probably chose the wrong contractor. It's the same contractor that the federal government chose to run the Federal Health Connect program. So there's little advantage to move into the federal program. In addition, we do some different things with qualifying people for Medicaid and with the demographics in Vermont that used to be part of Catamount Health. So our IT program, Vermont Health Connect, is unique, and so moving to a different platform would be difficult and probably expensive. I would say that in my work on the Government Accountability Committee, our track record with IT systems over the last decade has been really problematic, whether we're talking about motor vehicles or the tax department or the recently canceled nearly $800 million AHS IT upgrade. my only consolation is that last week I had a professional who works in this field with large corporations said that it's no better in the private sector. So, you know, that's a small comfort. We have work to do to make this system work better.
Thank you. Would someone like to jump right up and ask another question? Sure, there's a lot of questions out there. Don't be afraid. Yeah.
So in a lot of the school districts in this area recently, the people voted to go with the unification process. This is going to come to you again, David, because it's your committee. What happens if there are changes to that legislation? Does that mean that there's no way to, I don't want to really say ununify, but there's no way to change it once you've voted yourselves in if the actual law changes?
So I would say there's always a way out, but it won't be easy to make those changes. It'll probably take a change in statute at the state level. And I want to congratulate this district, Addison Central. Great leadership, overwhelming votes in support of creating this single larger school district, integrated larger school district. I think, and a reason why the vote was unanimous in our committee and very strong in the House to move forward with Act 46 legislation was that we believe that this will serve children better and contain costs to a certain extent, allow a more efficient system for delivering education to students. There are challenges, there's no doubt about that, particularly in the formation of the Articles of Association, how these communities are going to come together and support each other and get the job done. It requires an expansion of our thinking of local. Most people in this area, if they were asked what their local high school was, they'd say Middlebury Union High School. But often when they think about their local elementary school, it's the little community schools. I believe that the little community, and the evidence so far is that the little community schools are actually better supported under these larger unified districts, and they remain viable, will remain viable for a much longer period of time. So I'm hopeful. It's wonderful to see the work that's been done so far by local communities and the communication around the state about how can we do the best job for our children and contain costs for taxpayers at the same time.
Just a comment, I think that a lot of the reason that these things went through with the votes they did is because there was a lot of money out there being waved in front of people's faces, not to mention the fact that there was a stick coming if you didn't do it in the next couple of years anyway. And I would plead to those of you in the legislature to not pass these sorts of significantly altering bills and put such a short time frame on them. Because this bill just passed last session, and to get the big bucks, you had to vote for it this year, which meant a very quick turnaround time, and a lot of people didn't have a clue. And I can tell you that in this district, where the representatives, or whatever you want to call them, for the school board, and they come from all the different communities, but they ended up being voted on by the entire district. And that was because the state forced it to be that way. I mean, the initial proposal was that you'd have, like, Salisbury would elect somebody, and Ripton would elect somebody, and Middlebury would have many somebodies. And instead it ended up being everybody was elected by the whole district, and people in the whole district didn't have a clue who they were voting for. So, and there was not even a forum for anybody to put out their, whatever you want to call it, positions or whatever, until 1 week before the vote. That was the first time there was any opportunity, and that came with, well, the notification of that meeting came out in the Thursday Independent for a meeting happening on a Sunday. And then they had another one on Tuesday with information that came in the mail on Tuesday. That was it. So I just think that doing these things that call for such a rapid response, if it's not a dire emergency, it's just not good practice.
So I would say two comments. One is that it's a 5-year process. It was voluntary to get into the accelerated process, which did take the very fast timeline and gave 5 years of tax credits rather than 4 years of tax credits. And there were a bunch of communities that have taken the slower process and are having a longer, stronger debate in their communities about whether to move forward in this. And my district is an example of that. Addison Northeast, Bristol, Lincoln, Starksboro, Moncton, and New Haven, and Mount Abe are not going after the accelerated merger proposal, but rather going for the longer process. And I think that'll be helpful, that district. In fact, we only expected 4 or 5 of these accelerated Act 46 school districts to take place. We already have 9, and it looks like we'll have at least 2 more before June 30th, which has just been surprising. I think it's more than the money. It's the realization among many citizens that we need to do a better job educating our children, and this is that, quote, something had to be done, and the something in Act 46 was a pretty good something. I don't expect any changes at all this year. We will entertain some changes. Should I return next year, we will entertain changes, particularly for the districts south of Route 4, where there's this real patchwork of communities that are going to be, it's going to be hard to find your dance partner to come together with a larger school district. With regard to the voting, this is part of the Articles of Association, and I have suggested that proportional voting, rather than have many people from the larger community and just one person from the outlying communities, that each community gets the same number of people on the board, so that you have a full discussion of the people on the board, and then there's a proportional weight to each person's vote, so that we satisfy the requirements of the federal Constitution, that it's one person, one vote. And at the same time, we have the same sort of collaboration among communities by having equal representation of the individuals on the board. So I think if I were on an Act 46 study committee, that's the kind of thing I would advocate for. We were determined to have as much local control in this bill as possible. I used to joke that for a decade I heard that there was no local control until we took it away, and then there was all this local control. But we did try to maintain as much local control as possible. There is resentment when Montpelier says, this is the way it's going to be done. So we did put what we felt was a fairly lengthy process in place, encouraging local communities to get together and make these kinds of decisions on behalf of their children for their region. That's the best I can do. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bobby Carnwath. I'm from Cornwall. And I really came with a question for Senator Ayer, but in her absence, I'll bet Senator Bray can probably field this since it's highly energy related. I'm on the Cornwall Planning Board, and the Select Board has recommended to us that we read the Bill 230, which has just been, I think, put before the Finance Committee, and it has to do with solar siting. And I think all the towns in Vermont are struggling with solar siting. And so far, I think I really like this. It covers a lot of things that we're struggling with and does it in a meaningful way. So I had a couple of questions, and then this is going to lead to a related question, which is, it suggests that we have another branch or member of the Public Service Board, which kind of leads into the whole question about the Public Service Board and how do we think we're doing. And a question that I asked in the Vermont Digger the other day is, why did we think it was a good idea to ask Chris Recchia how he thinks the Public Service Department is doing? And so I understand the legislature is looking into the Public Service Department. Are they really serving the public, or are they serving corporations, as it would appear through the gas line situation through those hearings? So if there were a new member of the Public Service Board, how could we be sure that it would really represent something other than corporations, would be one question.
Thank you for, this is an important and challenging topic because so S230, which I had introduced in the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee, we passed that bill out a little more than a week ago. Then it moved to Finance because it involves some revenues of the state, as well as Finance is actually in charge of the Department of Public Service and the Public Service Board. So there's a bit of a split. Most of our work was on how we would cite energy projects, renewable energy projects, particularly in the state of Vermont, in a way that would be, I'd say, more agreeable to more towns. Some folks may know that, and so the main thrust of S230 is to give Vermonters a greater say at the local level in how renewable energy projects are developed throughout our state. There are a couple challenges behind all this work. The first is that the largest, I would say really the largest challenge to our culture in a way is moving over the course of the next 30, 40, 50 years away from burning fossil fuels, which we know have negative consequences both for the long-term environment and even on a daily basis. Smoke from burning fossil fuels shortens the lives of 200,000 Americans every year. People die, it's like secondhand cigarette smoke in a way. So there's a lot of agreement to make that move. The problem has been how do you do it in a way that towns and regions feel engaged and respectful, productive dialogue in what kind of projects get built and where they get built. S230 addresses that. So to shift gears a little bit to what you were talking about with the Public Service Board itself and the Department of Public Service and how they operate, so that is a good question. I can't say what Senator Ayer would be able to share at this point, other than I'm aware that they have been looking at that the role of public advocate at the Department of Public Service, and I don't know if they'll be adding so 230 went over to their committee. I don't know if they'll add something on that changes that, but I think what they are concerned about is whether or not the advocacy division of the Department of Public Service is representing the public, I guess, sort of proactively enough. Consumer interests more than utility interests.
So where is that discussion going on now?
So that's going on in Finance. They will, I believe, they'll be taking, when we're back in Montpelier tomorrow, they'll be taking more testimony. I think they'll be voting that bill out as soon as tomorrow or no later than the next day.
Oh, the 230.
230.
And I was wondering about the discussion about whether we need a public advocate in the DPS.
Right, so there is already an advocacy division, and they are considering whether or not they might add someone. I mean, I talked to Commissioner Recchia 2+ years ago about creating an advocate, and separating it from that department, and that it would be a member of the Attorney General's staff, so come out of
Excellent.
another independent, constitutionally elected statewide officer.
I think a lot of people are thinking that's the direction to
Right.
go, that's the only way it's really going to work.
I mean, there is something like that currently in agriculture. So there's a member of the Attorney General's staff who serves at the Agency of Agriculture. So there's a degree of independence that comes out of having people that aren't necessarily part of this administration serving in an agency like that. And that was a model I brought to Commissioner Recchia. He was, at that point, he said, we're aware of this kind of complaint, and we're working on it. Give us some time and judge us on our track record. I think now 2 more years have gone
That's what
by,
we're doing.
and I think there are people who say we've watched the record and we're not satisfied.
Thank you.
So then there's also the Public Service Board, which is more independent yet of the administration, but some people would say not entirely.
Well, it's appointed by the administration, right?
Right. And so we have Chair Volz, who was appointed originally by Governor Douglas. He's been reappointed. And then Governor Shumlin has appointed 2 additional folks, Margaret Cheney and Sarah Hoffman. And 230 adds a public assistance officer at the Public Service Board. And that person's job is to help people who are trying to follow proceedings, file forms, know the status of what's going on, to really play a communications role, because people are finding it a very difficult branch of government to interact with, because it is very formal and it is a quasi-judicial process.
But so long as the Public Service Board is appointed, it's really going to be an arm of the governor's policy, isn't it? It is.
Well, you know, yes, I'd say there'll always be some influence for sure. They do have, you know, a sworn oath of office. They do have law to follow. I mean, it is quasi-judicial, so that, and some people say that put the accent on the judicial, not the quasi, because it is very formal. And so, you know, you could say this, maybe the same thing of the regular court system. Is it political? I'd say there is some influence. But I know that people who serve there take their work very seriously, and they look at issues all the way around. I think what happens is they've come to conclusions that leave some people unhappy, and then they say, well, they're not doing their job. I'd say probably a fairer way to assess them is to look at certificates issued and look at all the conditions they build into them. Not that they didn't say no, but that they added conditions to what they allowed. And again, I know in the end, some people will be satisfied, some unsatisfied, but we're pushing to make those two, the department and the board, more responsive to Vermonters, and particularly municipalities and towns that try to interact with them.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Barbara Andrus from here in Salisbury. I received an electronic message this last week asking me to support a bill, about allowing dental therapists to work in the state, and I wondered if anybody could comment on that. It sounds good, but I don't know any of the background.
So I can't give you, I'm a little surprised actually you got an email about this now, because I think we passed that law approximately a year ago. And so maybe there's something afoot to either push it forward or pull it back. I'm just unaware of anything going on. But the original thinking on all this was that one of the areas of health care that's we've come to understand increasingly, if you don't take care of your teeth, you can also have other health consequences. It's not, and that many Vermonters who might get health care often don't get enough dental care. So part of the notion was to just just like when you go to the, last time I got sutures at the emergency room, it was a physician's assistant who stitched me up, not a physician. And so the same sort of things going on in the world of dentistry that said we could add another tier of healthcare worker at the dentist's office that would provide something between a hygienist that's just doing cleaning and the dentist who might be, pulling teeth and all the rest. And that was the kind of position you're talking about. So as best I know, that we passed that a year ago, and that is becoming, it may already, I don't know what's happening out in the dental practices.
I believe that bill is passed the Senate last year, but it's coming to the House. That's probably why you got the email. And I support that bill because of the explanation that the Senator Bray just gave us about expanding access to dental services and just getting more of that important health care to more Vermonters.
Thank you. We have a couple microphones here. Would someone like to ask another question, please?
John Ball from Addison. We're all cognizant of the present situation with global warming, I think. One of the solutions that's being advocated by some people is what's known as bioengineering. And this ranges from everything from, I think, putting up mirrors in space to reflect sunlight to putting mirrors in our atmosphere by dispersing them from flying aircraft. Some people call those contrails. It's the big clouds that we used to think, or chemtrails. It's the big clouds we used to think were contrails that now are purportedly these aluminum particles that are being distributed into our atmosphere. There are other schemes as well in the bioengineering portfolio. One of them that seems to make sense to me and to a lot of the scientists who I've been aware of and following is what's known as sequestering carbon or carbon farming. I'm an advocate of biochar, which is simply taking charcoal out of your wood stove, pulverizing it, putting it in your compost, and it is inhabited by the microorganisms that are known to be really beneficial for growing things. Now, there's two things that happen here. Well, there's many things that happen, but two important things to me that happen. Number one, it improves the fertility and tilth of your soil. My wife swears that she's never had better produce grown than what she has grown on the biochars that I've been working on. And two, it sequesters carbon out of the air. Because the trees take in the carbon, we burn them, we leave some of that carbon that we put in the biochar and put in the ground. So carbon in the soil is really a healthy thing to do, and it's helping to solve, scientists say it could, if it was done on a worldwide basis, pull enough carbon out of the air to get our carbon dioxide levels back to pre-industrial times. I know Harvey's aware of this, and I think the legislature was doing something in this regard. We have so many farms in this state now that if we started doing that, Vermont could again be a leader in a really positive way in both farming and reversing global warming. That's one question. I think Harvey might address that for us. The other one, Harvey, is you also mentioned something the last time I saw you at a legislative breakfast about the pollinators, that the legislature was looking at the pollinator situation right now. I wonder if you could maybe comment on both of these issues.
I don't have a real question on or answer on the biochar, other than agriculture is now using that technique in their composting operations. But I want to back up a little bit. About 50 years ago, maybe a little longer, the U.S. government decided that we were going to handle our animal waste on farms. And I know some of the first projects were right here in Addison County, and that was the liquid manure ponds that we've seen. And we've been using that for quite a number of years. And that's the only program that the federal government was willing to help and assist and help finance on the farms for many, many years. And they didn't have any other options out there. Composting was always a better option, but it wasn't an option that was available to the farm community because it wasn't something that was supported by NRCS. They're the group, Natural Resources Conservation Service, is a U.S. program that, or USDA program, that helps assist farmers and manage their on-farm waste. And so until recently, there hadn't been a change there. So that's why we headed in the road of liquid manure, and I think to a lot of degree, to some degree anyways, we've regretted that. But we've also brought some new technology to that, and now a lot of farms have installed a process where they gather the gas through a methane digestion process where they take that gas and turn it into electricity. So right here in Addison County, we have at least 3 farms that are doing that. So, you know, it's a real plus to the whole community, not just farms, but it reduces the methane going into the air because we're burning that instead of just letting it evaporate into the air. There's that benefit, but going to a more solid space, we put more of that organic matter back in the soil, which is what we need, and we better manage our waste associated with that. So some of the programs that got us to where we are federal programs that just geared our industry head in that direction. And now when we look at it in hindsight, maybe we should have gave a little more thought to that and come up with a little bit different plan. On the other hand, we're now seeing biodigesters that take all kinds of biomaterials and turn it into a gas product. So we can take food waste, we can take human waste, we can take waste from the farms, and probably some waste from manufacturing that we can use to, if we commingle those and put them into a process, we could improve water quality at the same time we're producing either a natural gas to go into a gas pipeline or gas that we could burn for, like we are currently, to generate electricity. So there are some options out there. And when we think of that, we think of, you know, Rutland, Virgins, occasionally Middlebury has overflow from their septic system that goes in to the water. We read about it in the paper a couple days later, and we're really offended by the fact that we knowingly have a direct discharge into the waters of the state that are permitted under federal law. So if we could combine all of those pieces and resources together, I think we'd be a lot better off. So on the pollinator protection committee, in the discussion we had, and we did have that in the committee. We spent quite a long time taking testimony from beekeepers, people in the industry. We even had Bayer came up from, I think it was either South or North Carolina, that they do a lot of research. They use some of the neonicotinoids in their product. So they came up and testified. We heard from scientists and entomologists, and we discovered that there's a lot of unanswered problems. That's why we're having colony collapse, not just in Vermont, but in the world. I mean, this is a worldwide issue right now. It's not just a Vermont issue. So the Obama administration had actually asked EPA and USDA to get together and try to find out and understand what was going on with pollinators across the nation. And so he set them up, and they basically researched it for a year or so and came up with the answer that they really didn't come to any conclusion. So what they did is they shifted that off to the state, and they required each agency of agriculture to come up with a pollinator protection program, and it was basically to understand what was happening on the state level. So what we did is we kind of married the two when we set up a pollinator protection committee that was going to look at all these issues in more depth than we could in the agriculture community or in the agriculture committee, and then come back with a report of their findings. So, and we didn't give them a direction to find something. We just told them to go out and understand what was happening in the industry, and then we'll take what they find, and if we need to, we can take further action.
When will that come back?
A year from now. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
Wanted to add just a brief note to what Representative Smith was just talking about. That goes back to soils. So last year, you may remember we passed the Vermont Clean Water Act, and was a comprehensive program to look at improving water quality around the state. One of the things, while that bill was in Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and actually Representative Sheldon came down from the House to work with us on this piece, is we added a healthy soils provision to the required agricultural practices, as well as to non-agricultural lands other than forestry. This year we're working on a forestry piece. So the whole notion here is, what do we mean by healthy soils? They are living soils that include the sort of properties that you're talking about. And one of the reasons to be interested in building healthy soils, so for instance that it has tilth and microbial life in it, is that those soils hold phosphorus better than less healthy soils, and they're also more physically stable when you get heavy rain events, the kind of rain events that are becoming more and more common. So they really can make a major contribution to water quality. They also have benefits to farmers in that healthier soils require less fertilizer brought in, and there's expense always with bringing in fertilizer. So, you know, one of the interesting pieces for me was that in a teaspoon of healthy soil, there are 7 billion with a B microbes living. So it's really an entire universe living in that first 6, 8, 10 inches of what we traditionally just call dirt. And it's not a ecosystem that we've really paid that much attention to. And like with many things, as we learn more, we realize that there are opportunities to do better from an environmental point of view, and from an economic point of view, and from a water quality point of view, by learning to see and pay closer attention to what's going on right under our feet.
Those were two great context pieces, and I'm glad you asked the question. We took amazing testimony in House Fish, Wildlife, and Water last year around healthy soils, and we got the beginning of a great education on how broad their benefits can be to us. And I think we're just on the cutting edge of changing how we manage our soils. There's a group in Brattleboro looking at urine called the Rich Earth Institute, and how to use it to fertilize and keep it out of the water stream, and then also enhance soil health. So I appreciate the question. I would also suggest, I think that comment period is still open on the required agricultural practices, so if you have thoughts on soil health, you can certainly include them now, because they are in, in the rulemaking process. So I would encourage you to get involved in that quickly, because I think they're getting into, they're getting into the formal public process, but they're taking comments on the draft right now.
Yeah, I'm also pleased that Chris mentioned the healthy soils. And the agriculture community has been working for, a long time. I know I've been growing cover crops for 35, 40 years and trying to do that, but we were somewhat limited in what we could do because of the technologies and the techniques we had out there. And now we have technology, we have equipment, planters, that can actually plant in heavy mass. So last year was the first year I grew some no-till corn, where you just plant your corn in a hayfield. And boy, we didn't have the kind of technology out there just a few years ago that would allow us to do that. So now we have an opportunity to grow crops with having continuous cover on the ground. And to get to the goal that Chris was talking about, you really have to have a no-till system in order to do that, because you don't want to keep plowing and turning and churning up your soils as you do it. So we're making great strides, but I've got to tell you that this is not an exact science, and for the last 20 or 30 years, NRCS has taken a leadership role in trying to figure out how this process works and how it goes. So we're really making great strides, but the book of knowledge to make this happen is being written as we speak. So we're kind of the frontier of this whole process. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam Guarnacha, and I'm from Middlebury, and I'm thrilled to hear the consciousness that is aware of billions of microbes in every teaspoonful of earth. And I just want to step back a little bit further even and bring the context about, in fact, the Book of Knowledge has been being written for over 3 billion years on this planet. And so the natural systems that it has taken the earth this long to produce so that we can stand here and be in this conversation with each other using a language, a symbolic language of ideas and thoughts and so forth. It's incredible, you know, that we're able to be in this conversation. So, and I'm thinking, I've sensed the frustration. You know, we're all trapped in these systems of our own making. I just finished writing a big oratorio. One of the pieces in it is a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke, about 80 years ago, said, "If we surrendered to Earth's intelligence, we would rise up, rooted like trees." Instead, though, and I'm thinking of our educational systems, our healthcare systems, we entangle ourselves in knots of our own making. So that leads me then to the thought, you know, how do systems change? I know that the microbes are not aware of being Vermont microbes, or are the bees, okay? We too really need to see ourselves differently as people of the world, of the earth, because we're really responsible now for a global system. If we're not getting that, we're not paying attention, okay? So so the question is, at this legislative level, I sense the frustration. I'm trapped too in a system. I drove a fuel-burning car, a gas-burning car here this morning. We all have a carbon footprint just to be here in this conversation, which we know is a negative for the planet and for our children and grandchildren and so forth. So how do we change these systems? We have to get into the bigger context. I'm disappointed to hear, for example, that the Obama administration sent that back to the states, because these bees aren't members of states. You know, they don't know about Connecticut or Hawaii or anything. So, I mean, this is a global system. We have to think globally. We have to act globally. We have to, and of course, we're trapped in living locally. And we're all trapped in these systems of our own making. So, question is, how can we, in the legislatures, support each other to change the conversation? And it has to happen pretty soon, because, you know, all of these issues, education, healthcare, and so forth, what kind of systems we have. And please see Michael Moore's new movie. All of these things are going to really be irrelevant if we continue to trash the planet, okay? So thank you for considering how, you know, in Montpelier we can pull back and see the whole more effectively, more in concert with the living systems that have supported us for these 3 billion years.
So I'll give one answer from, you know, at the very beginning when we started, I talked about the energy transformation projects that are underway. And I said it was the largest challenge for our culture. And I think we have a tremendous amount of work to do. I mean, I'll make fun of our species a little bit. You know, for the last 100,000 years or so, our main way of getting energy is go around, gather things to one spot, and then burn them once you have them, whether that's gas, oil, coal, wood, you know. And it's had consequences, and we know about it in terms of health and planetary health. So we've said, okay, that is not a sustainable path to be on. How do we move out of that? And that's where we have the state's comprehensive energy plan, which looks a long way down the road. You know, 90% renewable fuels across all sectors by 2050. So that picks up on the transportation question you asked, because about 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont come from transportation, and the number of electric vehicles registered in Vermont is only around 1,000. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of supporting a clean electrical generation that can then also be used for heating our homes and businesses, cooling them, running processes and manufacturing plants, and moving us around. Although it's a daunting challenge, I think we're off to a very good start on the work that we're doing. There are bumps along the way. I mentioned the controversies around solar siting, but long term, I feel like Vermonters have embraced being good stewards, and I think we're making good systems level choices. And I just respond to your Rilke quote. So Thoreau said, seen from a sufficient distance, we all are neighbors. So I'd say the bees probably feel the same way too.
Yeah, I just want to maybe give you a little better understanding about the book of knowledge I was talking about. And, you know, for generations, for centuries, as the world has expanded, they've gone into new uncultivated areas, especially here in the United States when they first started settling. And when you read any of the historical books that are out there, you understand that, wow, when they first tilled the soil, they grew the best vegetables and crops in abundance and size and everything that has ever been grown. And then a few years later, that same soil can't support that. They move further west. And that was what took place in the United States, and I think basically around the world. But now we're starting to understand that 3 billion years of natural environment out there, and we're trying to blend that into our cultivation practices that we use to grow crops today. So I think we're going a long ways, but really understanding and how to make that work. We know how to make that work. We can go in and clear off some prairie grass that's never been tilled and grow a heck of a good crop for a few years. And that's what we're trying to understand, is we have invaded some of these areas, and now we need to go back and have a better understanding of how things work so that we can create that health in the soil and the microbial action that's there so that we're all better off. And I think that's where we're headed, to be quite honest with you.
Thank you.
I'll continue the conversation a little bit. I'm Heidi Willis, and I'm from Salisbury. And just a little side note, this is the first time this breakfast has occurred here at the Salisbury Church, or in Salisbury. So I'm really pleased and proud to have it here. And I'm very disappointed that Willem hasn't made it. I hope he's okay, because he routinely complained about not having a legislative breakfast in his district. But I think, kind of on a side note, I've been really, I think we oftentimes think of ourselves in Vermont as, you know, a small fish in the pond. But this week, with the news that General Mills is going to be labeling their products as GMO, either free or not free, I'd like to compliment the legislatures and Vermonters that we passed that legislation and we held fast to that. And I feel like this is kind of maybe the domino tipping. And it's a lesson to us that we may say, oh, the local action doesn't really matter, but it does. You know, what we do can have an influence, and I hope next year that we will keep that in mind as we're working for a carbon tax to help us reduce our use of fossil fuels. So anyway, thank you legislators for that work, and I hope we can keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, just a little bit of follow-up on the GMO issue in debate, and that's ongoing. And I know that Vermont, by passing that law, really did stimulate the debate and get it going on across the nation. The debate in Vermont was people want to know what's in their food. And so Campbell Soup and General Mills have come out and said they're going to label, but according to Vermont's label, they're going to put on may contain GMOs. And we already know that it may contain GMOs because when you have 95% of all your soybean, your corn, and your canola is being grown with biotechnology, that it's there. The simplest and easiest way to do it would have been to put a big sign over every store, except that those were selling non-GMO items as GMOs sold here. And we're not going to know any more after this gets done than we do today.
One last, hopefully really positive thought. I want to echo what Heidi said, that I think our responsibility in this very, very special state, where a conversation like this doesn't happen in California or Connecticut or Pennsylvania, and doesn't happen and really can't happen. Vermont has a huge opportunity and responsibility, as we can see in the national election. Yay, Bernie! Because whether you like him or not, it's because of Vermont that someone like that can have such a huge voice and have such a great influence. But we have a responsibility to model something that can happen. You know, universal health care, whatever name you want to give it, free education, at least in public institutions. You know, where, I mean, I live right next to the campus of Middlebury College, where it's $65,000 a year, and believe me, it's getting more and more elite every moment. And if only the elite can get a higher education, you know what happens. Greatest disparity between the rich and the poor in the world, in the industrialized world anyway. So, but Vermont can change that. We can model it, as Costa Rica is around 75% of the land in Costa Rica is under protection. And by the way, I just returned from Costa Rica with a mouthful of teeth, new teeth that cost us less than a quarter of what it would have cost us here. It would have been a Mercedes-Benz here, and it's a used Toyota down in Costa Rica. Why? Because dental care is really hard to get.
So, you know, Vermont leads the nation and the world in so many ways, and I'm so proud of the work that I've done over my career in the State House. You know, we did civil unions and civil marriage at a time when, you know, much of the United States felt like this was going to end the world. And you know what? It turned out that recognizing the civil rights of all the individuals in this state and in this country is really an important piece. Vermont has led this for centuries, and that's a wonderful thing that we did. You talk about alternative energy. Vermont has been the leader in solar power and alternative energy in the country for a number of years. Now, it's difficult to keep that status because other states, Colorado, Massachusetts, are catching up. But if we hadn't opened that door and made the case for solar power and climate change, you know, the rest of the country now is working to do what we've done. In education, it's now possible to get 2 years of free college education for first-generation Vermonters. to close that education gap. And I am so proud of the work that we've done with that as we hear national candidates now advocate for 2 years of free college for every American. We did it first here in Vermont, and I'm so proud of that work. And in other areas where Vermont has led the nation and done some really good work, not without bumps along the road, not without making some mistakes, no doubt about that. You know, food quality and our GMO bill, all of these things are your Vermont legislature and Vermonters across the state leading the nation in doing what's good for our citizens and our children, and I'm really proud of that work.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam, for that comment about how do we bring the picture to a bigger place, a larger scale. I think about it a lot as a new legislator. I'm in Montpelier, and I see a lot of parallels among the systems that need change, that we are working hard on, all of us are working hard on. You can look at the environment, you can look at schools, you can look at healthcare, and I think the way I look at it is that we've been taking everything apart really well for 200 years. And now we're in this kind of exciting moment where it's time to put stuff back together again, and you can feel it. And then you work within the context of a democracy that was created in those last 200 years, and you realize that you can have subtle paradigm shifts around issues like soil health by including them in the framework of the laws we have today and participating. It's so exciting to be here in Salisbury and having a dialogue in this legislative breakfast. It's refreshing to me. On GMOs, my sister happens to live in Marseille, France, and I got an email from her saying, hey, I'm hearing all about Vermont over here in your GMO labeling bill. So we are in a global community. It's very exciting what we can do here through incremental change. And I would say, stay involved and be involved with your legislator on the issues you care most about. I think we had a day last week where we voted on 27 bills on the floor of the House. It's not humanly possible for me to track those bills, and we depend on you all to be watching with us and pointing stuff out that needs to change and helping us monitor the evolution of our democracy. So please stay engaged and in touch, and that's what makes Vermont such a powerful place to be, is that we all represent a reasonable number of people and we can be in touch with our constituents. So thanks for being here and making this a great conversation today.
I'm Glenn Andrus from Salisbury, and I don't have a question, but I have some thanks that I want to give to our legislators. I'm here with two hats on. First, because I'm on the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation. And I want to thank the legislature for the continuing support of the barn grants and the historic preservation grants. Every grant round that we run through the Division for Historic Preservation, we have 3 to 4 times the amount of applications for funds as we can fund. But this work really does help, and that $200,000 in each grant round actually generates millions of dollars of restoration work in the state, which is helping the state's economy. But another place where it makes Vermont a leader, you may not be aware, but National Geographic Traveler twice has declared Vermont the most rewarding tourist destination in the United States. Ranks it with Kyoto and Granada internationally. Why? Because we preserve our environment, we preserve our historic monuments, and people can read that on our landscape. And our landscape is so precious to us. It's one reason, and you know, we think, okay, preservation sounds kind of elite, but it's important because it's bringing people here. It's Vermont's state image, and the world recognizes this. And so it does resound in our economy in many, many ways. And this image is an important part of the future of our state. And time and time again, I have pled with, for instance, the Division for Historic Preservation to make the point that we can't soil our nest. And this is where things like our solar arrays, the proper placement of our solar arrays, is very important to the state's future, because it only takes about 20% of an invasion in a landscape to ruin your landscape. Okay, so thank you for that. But then I want to put on a local hat too, and this probably dramatizes how preservation funds help multiply. This church received a $20,000 grant. It helped trigger $93,000 in gifts, and it helped trigger a $170,000 restoration project on this building, which is an important landmark. This church can be seen from Whiting, from Highway 30. That steeple is an important landmark in the Otter Valley. And a 25-member church can't do it alone. But the other thing is, this is part of the community's heritage. This is a community building. We're delighted that you're here today. This is something that we want to be involved in the community. This is a community resource, as well as part of our history, as well as part of our landscape. And I also want to thank the legislature, and I'm sorry that Claire and Willem aren't here, because they really went to bat for us on this. It took 2.5 years to clear the title on the ex-parsonage that the church owned so that we could sell it, because it had a reversionary clause that if we ever got rid of it, it would pass to the state of Vermont. Well, the bureaucrats in the state were going to cover their backsides, and they were not going to consider our appeal. Vermont doesn't need a 1984 raised ranch modular house in Salisbury Village. Okay? The last thing they need is that, in need of some repairs. And we couldn't sell it. And we needed that to help finance this project. And the only way, finally, that we could do it was through an act of you in the legislature. You built it. You may not even be aware of this, but you built that into the state budget a year ago. And as a result, this week, we are finally signing the papers to sell that parsonage, which will permit us to carry forth on our project. When you go outside, look at the tower. It's got a 50-year restoration that's taken place on it, and this spring the building will be painted, and to the tune of $52,000 more. But it's preserving this for Salisbury. It's preserving this for the Vermont landscape. It's preserving this for the community. And another plea, well, this is a plea, not a thank you. We're in a blind spot here for cell service. And 10 years ago, the Salisbury Church had a contract and all the engineering done to put a cell tower up in that steeple. It would not have affected the appearance of the church at all. We were ready to go, and the company went into bankruptcy. The thing got thrown into the courts. And by the time it was cleared up, people had been putting their cell towers elsewhere, and everyone has ignored Salisbury, but we're still in a blind spot. And I have pled with the state in various ways, anywhere I can get the message out. Salisbury Church would really like to put an installation in this steeple. And it reaches a huge sweep of the Otter Valley. And so if you hear of anybody who wants to put in a cell tower, please give us a call.
Thank you. Are there any more questions out there? We have another, probably about 10 more minutes.
My name is Ken Tahasik. I'm from Salisbury. You could see our house from here. And this has turned into a thank you fest, but so I want to add to that. My wife and I moved here only about 10 years ago, so most of you don't think we're Vermonters even. But we came here for this. We came here, the trees are nice, and the hiking is nice, and all that is very nice, the steeples. But this kind of way that people interact, this living and governing at a human scale is nothing we've ever seen anywhere else. So thank you, legislators, and thank you, all of you. Which leads me to my hot button, my latest hot button. Everywhere I go, I'm an old guy, as you can see. You're all mostly old folks. You can see I'm not a politician. But everywhere I go, that's the way it is. When I go to church, that's the way it is. Go to the theater, we went to Town Hall Theater the other night, that's the way it was. My concern is technology is doing a lot of wonderful things, but one of the things it's doing is destroying community, destroying what they call retail politics like this. And that's how we get national candidates like the unnamed guy, I won't say. So the question is, I don't know if this is a comment or a question, but what can we do with these kind of legislative breakfasts, which are wonderful for us old guys, but what can we do to build community, bring younger people more actively into politics again? And we do have some young politicians, by the way. That's marvelous to all of you. But thank you very much.
So I'll respond to that. I think the legislative breakfast should not be every Monday morning. It's problematic. You see how many legislators are here out of the Addison delegation. If it were once a month or twice a month, that would be a lot better. It should extend longer into the end of the session. I think the public would have an awful lot to say what's happening in the first week of May when we're trying to wrap things up and it's crunch time and people have particular issues like the Medicaid issue that we're tracking closely. It would be a good time to have a legislative breakfast. So this is Monday morning. Who can't be here? Kids, you know, they're all in school. Even college students have for the most part, coursework that they're responsible for. So we eliminate, you know, most of the students in the state. Secondly, working people, you know, so you know, younger folks who are not retired and have to go to work every day, they can't show up Monday morning. So why not have one of these on a Saturday, so that you know, some different people from the community can come. It's wonderful to be here in Salisbury. First of all, the food was unbelievably fantastic. Whoever baked the food, just and fresh faces. You know, too often it's the same dozen or two people, right, that are at these legislative breakfasts, and it would be great to reach a wider audience. Now, it is recorded, and people can access the internet and see a recording of the session, but it would be wonderful if it were scheduled in a way that a broader swath of the public could attend.
Thank you.
I'm Paula Guarnacha. Just a quick comment to this Vermont Love Fest. If I ever doubt that what we do in this small little state up here in the corner of the United States, when we were in Costa Rica, we met a lot of people, some from the United States, but many, many from other countries in South America and Europe. And to a person, they all had heard of Vermont. Their faces lit up. They were like, oh, Vermont, and many of them said, oh, Bernie. But, you know, they seemed to know other things about our state, too, that we were somehow special and different and doing some unique things. And it was remarkable to me how much awareness there is of what we're doing here across the world, at least in Europe and South America anyway, and Central America. So I guess we just keep it up, do more, keep doing it, because we are providing some modeling that's it's being watched. People are watching what we're doing. So great to be here.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Dave Silverman. I'm also on the edge of campus in Middlebury. Maybe we should carpool. I came in a Prius, so that's half electric. We have an exciting opportunity here in Vermont to do similar to how with GMO we led the way. We have a bill in front of the House right now that was passed by the Senate, S-241, would legalize, regulate, and tax the use of marijuana by adults. 80,000 adults in Vermont, that's about 20% of the adult population, use marijuana on a regular basis. About as many people use marijuana as smoke cigarettes. The sale of marijuana is a 15-year sentence. It's a felony. We've decriminalized possession of small amounts. but we haven't done anything about the distribution system. We have the opportunity to lead on this instead of having the systems thrust upon us. Massachusetts is going to have a ballot initiative this year. Maine may have a ballot initiative this year. Rhode Island probably will. Connecticut is considering one as well. States, we are the only state doing it through the legislature. We have an opportunity to do it right. We have an opportunity to craft legislation that is politically sustainable, that is socially sustainable, and that is environmentally sustainable in a way that California and Colorado and Oregon and Washington, in a way that their systems are not, in a way that Massachusetts and the initiative that they're looking at is not. And so I would urge the legislators here to take a look at my letter, my long letter in the Independent last Monday's edition, for some suggestions on how we can have some sustainability in the system and have a new product, a new regulated product, work for all Vermonters. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question here. Go ahead.
I'm Barry Bailey from Salisbury, and as a former teacher, I have a great concern about the young people with the marijuana bill, of giving them the message, it's okay. And it's okay if mom and dad can now sit right in the living room and smoke right around them. Their brains are not equipped to handle that at this point. And I want to know how you would prevent an increase in marijuana use among the young people. Yes, I know some of them are using it right now, but I think that it sends a message to them that it's okay in the state of Vermont if I wreck my brain. It's legal so they can get some more tax money to use. So tell me how it's going to help the young people.
So, not a legislator. Look, 75% of our high school seniors today say that marijuana is easy to get. This is a survey not done by marijuana advocates. This is a survey done by our Department of Health. It has been that way for years. You can take a look at the Vermont Healthy Kids survey going back a decade. It's been 70 to 80%. Say it's easy to get. It's easy to get today. 1 in 4 high school seniors use it monthly today. That's scary. We've also seen in Colorado that after 2 years of legalization, youth usage rates haven't moved. Legalization does not increase youth use because legalization doesn't impact youth. We've seen in national health surveys, it's a big survey by Health and Human Services, that even though disapproval of marijuana in society among kids, disapproval has gone down, youth use has stayed steady. Disapproval gone down, access gone up, use has stayed steady. We're seeing a steady state in youth usage that's not being impacted by a variety of factors. Increased acceptability in society is already happening. You take a look at modern culture today, in the music and the movies, in mass media, marijuana is widely accepted. It's just something that's not thought of as harmful anymore. And so changing the law is not going to change that. And it hasn't changed it everywhere it's been changed. We've seen youth access, again, steady. And so I would throw the question back as, how is it that throwing the person who grows 10 plants in their yard in jail for 10 years, I think that's the Vermont law, and 10 plants is 10 years, how is that keeping kids from using pot? It's not.
Hi, Margaret Cloak, Middlebury. The one concern I have, and it isn't really a concern, I guess, in that particular way, but the thought I have is that these kids are getting their marijuana from people off the street. Any drugs you get are off the street are dangerous, much more dangerous than anything we would be able to regulate here. And anything to get rid of the drug dealers in the state of Vermont and any place else would be a welcome change, and regulation would help that. We could put them out of business. So please consider that. It's a very important part of the conversation.
Thank you. One more follow-up, and then we'll call it a day.
So I think we have to start by admitting we have a drug problem in the United States. The governor spent a good part of his State of the Union address a couple years ago talking about the opiate condition. We have this philosophy in the United States that every disease can be solved with a pill. Every problem can be solved with a pill. We take a pill to get up in the morning, a pill to go to bed at night. And so we have generated this sort of drug-oriented society, which is a serious problem. And so advocates of changes in the drug law first need to accept the fact that we have a drug problem in the United States and not ignore that and say, oh, there's no big deal about marijuana. On the other hand, we have been fighting a war against drugs for 50 years and losing. Any individual conducting a war that had a head on their shoulders would say it's time for a change in tactics. Now, I don't know whether I'm going to vote for this bill when it comes out of committee. It's likely at the moment not to come out of the Judiciary Committee, and it's likely that we won't act on it this year. But we have to have a serious conversation about what the state of Vermont is, what we are going to do for our citizens going forward. We had so we have pages in the legislature, wonderful young people, 8th graders. And among the brighter, more accomplished kids in the school are permitted into this program because they have to miss school 4 days a week for 6 weeks. And so they have to be capable of catching up or doing their work on the weekends in order to stay current with their studies. And so a young woman, an 8th grade student, was talking to our committee members when I walked in the room one day, and she was describing that marijuana is much easier to get than alcohol in her school. 8th grade. So, we need to do some work. And we need to put some serious thought into it and move forward with regard to, on the one hand, fighting drugs, and on the other hand, dealing with access in our schools.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And I'd like to have, sorry, a round of applause for all our cooks that put on a great breakfast. Thank you very much, the town of Salisbury. And I'd like to mention that next week, on the 28th, next Monday, we're going to be having an ag lunch in Bridport. So next week, it isn't going to be a legislative breakfast. It'll be an ag lunch in Bridport. And luncheon begins at 12 and it ends at 1:45. So have safe travels, and thank you for coming today and asking your questions.